The evening sky had already darkened when Tom Chen finished his shift at Ray's auto shop. His shoulders ached from a long day bent over engines, and all he wanted was to get home to his wife and kids. The clock on his dashboard read 8:43 p.m. as he pulled out of the parking lot, mentally calculating if he'd make it home in time to kiss his children goodnight. The roads were quiet in this part of town. Tom turned up the radio, letting the soft jazz ease his tired mind as he drove the familiar route he'd taken hundreds of times before. He'd been at Ray's for almost 9 years now, working his way up from basic oil changes to lead mechanic. At 34, with 2 kids and a mortgage, stability meant everything to him. His phone buzzed with a text from his wife. "Don't forget milk." Tom smiled. He'd stop at the corner store just before their neighborhood. He was only about 15 minutes from home when he noticed the flashing lights in his rearview mirror. Tom's heart skipped a beat, though he couldn't think of what he might have done wrong. He'd been driving under the speed limit. His taillight that had been out last week was fixed, and his registration was current. Still, he did what he always told his kids to do: stay calm and be respectful. He pulled over to the side of the road, turned off his music, and placed his hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel where they could be easily seen. 2 officers approached his car, one on each side. The beam from a flashlight swept across his face, momentarily blinding him. "License and registration," the officer on the driver's side demanded. His voice was tight, his face hard to see in the darkness beyond the harsh light. "Yes, sir," Tom replied, keeping his voice steady. "My registration is in the glove compartment and my license is in my wallet. I'm going to reach for them now, okay?" The officer didn't respond, just kept the light trained on Tom's face. Tom moved slowly, narrating his actions. "I'm just opening the glove compartment now to get my registration." As his hand moved toward the compartment, the officer on the passenger side suddenly tensed. "He's reaching for something." Before Tom could explain, the driver's side door was yanked open. Rough hands grabbed his arm, pulling him from the vehicle with such force that his seatbelt cut into his shoulder before unlatching. "Wait, I was just getting my registration like you asked." Tom's voice rose in panic as he found himself being forced face down onto the rough asphalt. The world became a confusion of shouting and pain as his cheek scraped against the road. "Stop resisting," one officer shouted, though Tom was doing everything he could to comply. "I'm not resisting," Tom gasped as a knee pressed down hard between his shoulder blades. He felt his arms being wrenched behind his back, cold metal biting into his wrists as handcuffs locked into place. "You match the description of a suspect in an armed robbery at the convenience store on Oak Street," the first officer said, his voice cold. Dark sedan, male, average height. Tom couldn't believe what he was hearing. "There must be a mistake. I've been at work all day. I'm just a mechanic heading home. You can call my boss." His words cut off as the pressure on his back increased. The knee shifted to his side, and then there was a sickening crack that sent white-hot pain shooting through his chest. Tom cried out, a primal sound of agony that echoed in the quiet street. "He's still resisting," one officer called out, though Tom had gone completely still, afraid to move and cause more pain. "Please," he whispered, his breathing becoming shallow and difficult. Each inhale sent shards of pain through his torso. "I think my ribs are broken. I need help." "Yeah, sure," the second officer scoffed. "You should have thought about that before you robbed that store." Tom's mind raced through a fog of pain. A robbery? He hadn't been anywhere near a store tonight. He'd gone straight from work to his car. There were witnesses, his co-workers, his boss, who'd waved goodbye as he left. The security cameras at Ray's would show the time he clocked out. They hauled him to his feet, ignoring his cries of pain. The world tilted and swam before his eyes. Tom felt nauseated, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool evening air. He tried once more to reason with them. "There are cameras at my work. They'll show I was there. Please just check. I need a doctor. I can't breathe right." The officers exchanged glances, but their grips on his arms didn't loosen as they walked him to the patrol car. Every step was agony. Tom felt something grinding in his chest, a sensation so wrong and painful that tears sprang to his eyes. "My kids are waiting for me," he said, his voice breaking. "My wife doesn't know where I am." "You should have thought about your family before breaking the law," one officer replied dismissively. As they reached the patrol car, Tom caught sight of his reflection in the window. There was blood on his face from where his cheek had scraped the ground. His work shirt was torn at the shoulder. He looked like a criminal, he realized with a sinking feeling. and he was being treated like one, guilty before proven innocent. They pushed him into the back seat, indifferent to how the movement sent another wave of searing pain through his chest. Tom tried to sit at an angle that put less pressure on his injured side, but with his hands cuffed behind him, there was no comfortable position. Through the cage separating him from the front seats, Tom could hear the officers radioing in. They described him as the robbery suspect, and mentioned that he had resisted arrest and needed to be subdued. Each lie felt like another blow. He wanted to protest, to tell them to check the security footage at the store, to call his boss, to do anything that would prove his innocence. But the pain in his chest was becoming overwhelming, making it hard to focus on anything else. As the car pulled away from the curb, Tom realized his own vehicle would be left there, probably towed before morning. Another expense, another problem. And his wife would be wondering where he was. His phone was still in the car, or maybe in one of the officers' pockets now. Would they let him make a call? Would anyone believe him? The streets passed by in a blur as Tom tried to make sense of what was happening. He'd done nothing wrong. He'd been polite and compliant. Yet here he was, injured and heading to jail for a crime he didn't commit. How had this happened so quickly? 20 minutes ago, he'd been thinking about whether his kids would still be awake when he got home. Now he wondered when he'd see them again. At the station, the bright fluorescent lights made Tom squint after the darkness of the patrol car. They took his fingerprints and mugshot, the camera capturing his disheveled appearance, the blood on his face, the look of confused pain in his eyes. During the booking process, he asked repeatedly for medical attention, but his requests were met with indifference. "The nurse will check you when she has time," a desk officer told him without looking up from his paperwork. "Sit down and wait your turn." Tom sat gingerly on a hard bench, each breath a struggle. He could feel the swelling around his ribs, the area hot and tender to the touch. He'd broken a rib once before, years ago, in a motorcycle accident, but this felt worse. Much worse. Other detainees glanced at him with a mix of curiosity and indifference. To them, he was just another guy who'd had a rough night with the law. They couldn't see that less than an hour ago, he'd been a regular, law-abiding citizen with a clean record and a simple life. Hours passed. The nurse never came. Instead, Tom was eventually led to a holding cell where he spent the night drifting in and out of a pain-filled haze. No one offered him medical help. No one allowed him to call his wife. No one listened when he tried to explain the mistake. By morning, the pain had settled into a constant, throbbing presence. Tom's face was pale, his breathing shallow. When they finally brought him before a judge for his arraignment, he could barely stand straight. The public defender assigned to him had spent less than 5 minutes talking to Tom before the hearing, barely listening to his story. As the charges were read, armed robbery, resisting arrest, assaulting an officer, Tom felt as if he'd stepped into someone else's nightmare. The prosecutor described him as a dangerous criminal who had fought with police during his arrest. The judge set bail at an amount Tom knew his family couldn't possibly afford, and all because he'd reached for his registration when asked. As they led him away from the courtroom, Tom caught sight of his wife in the gallery, her face streaked with tears. Somehow she'd found out where he was. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment he tried to convey everything he couldn't say. "I'm innocent. I'm sorry. Help me." The truth would come out eventually, it had to. But for now, Tom was just another statistic. Another name in the system. Another body in a cell. Another victim of a mistake that nobody seemed in any hurry to correct. The county jail smelled of industrial cleaner and despair. Tom sat on the edge of his bunk, trying to find a position that didn't send pain shooting through his side. 3 days had passed since his arrest, and he still hadn't received proper medical attention. Just 2 ibuprofen tablets twice a day from a nurse who barely looked at him. Sleep came in short, fitful bursts. The constant noise of the jail, metal doors clanging, guards shouting, other inmates talking or arguing, made rest nearly impossible. When he did manage to drift off, the pain in his ribs would jolt him awake if he moved wrong. His cellmate, an older man named Rodriguez, who was in for a parole violation, watched Tom with concern. "You don't look good, man," Rodriguez said that morning. "Your lips are turning blue when you sleep. You need to see a real doctor." Tom nodded weakly. He knew something was seriously wrong. Breathing felt like someone was stabbing him with each inhale. He'd been coughing too, painful, racking coughs that sometimes brought up flecks of blood that he tried to hide from the guards. He feared a broken rib might have punctured something inside him. "I've asked," Tom replied, his voice thin with pain. "They say I'm fine, just bruised." Rodriguez shook his head. "They don't want the paperwork. Medical transfer means they have to admit something happened." Tom's court-appointed lawyer, Mr. Wilson, visited briefly the previous afternoon. He was a thin, harried man with too many cases and too little time. He'd shuffled through Tom's file without really looking at it, then delivered the news in a flat, disinterested tone. "They've got you on video, Mr. Chen," Wilson had said. "Security camera from across the street shows someone matching your description entering the store." "That's impossible," Tom had insisted, leaning forward despite the pain. "I was at work. There are witnesses. My boss, my coworkers. They'll tell you I clocked out at 8:30. The robbery happened when?" Wilson checked his notes. "Around 8:15. Then it couldn't have been me. Ray's Auto is 20 minutes from that store. Check my time card. Call my boss." Wilson had sighed, making a small note in the margin of his paperwork. "I'll look into it. But the DA is pushing for 3 to 5 years. They're offering a deal. Plead guilty. They'll recommend 2 years with possibility of parole after 14 months. The suggestion had hit Tom like a physical blow. 2 years? He'd miss his daughter's entire second grade. His son would be starting middle school by the time he got out. His wife would have to manage everything alone, the mortgage, the bills, the children, and all for something he didn't do. "I'm not taking a deal," Tom had said firmly. "I'm innocent. There's proof. You just have to find it." Wilson had looked at him with something between pity and annoyance. "Everyone says they're innocent, Mr. Chen." Now alone with his thoughts and his pain, Tom wondered if he'd made the right choice. Fighting the charges meant staying in jail longer before trial, unless his family could somehow come up with the $50,000 bail. He knew they couldn't. Their savings account had less than $10,000 earmarked for the kids' college funds. His wife's teaching salary barely covered their monthly expenses even with his income. The door to the cell block clanged open. A guard called out, "Chen, visitor." Tom stood carefully, one arm pressed against his injured side. The walk to the visitation area felt like miles. Each step sent jolts of pain through his body, but the thought of seeing his wife gave him the strength to keep moving. She was waiting behind the glass partition, phone already in hand. The sight of her, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail, broke his heart. This was taking a toll on her, too. "Tom," she said as soon as he picked up the phone on his side. Her voice cracked. "You look terrible." He tried to smile, but it came out as a grimace. "I've been better. I've been calling everyone," she said, leaning closer to the glass. "Your boss wrote a statement about when you left work. I got the time cards. I've been to the police station every day, but no one will listen. They just keep saying it's in the hands of the courts now." Tom nodded, unsurprised but still disappointed. "What about the kids?" "They're with my mother. I told them you had to go away for work for a little while." Her eyes filled with tears. "Our son keeps asking when you're coming home." The pain in Tom's chest now had nothing to do with his ribs. "I'm so sorry you're going through this." "Don't apologize," she said firmly. "You didn't do anything wrong. We're going to prove it." She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "I talked to another lawyer. A better one." Hope flickered in Tom's eyes. "How can we afford that? I put the car up as collateral for a loan, and my mother helped. He's going to review everything tomorrow. He thinks he can get the security footage from Ray's to prove you were there." For the first time in days, Tom felt a small glimmer of hope. That would clear everything up. "There's more," she continued. "The real robber hit another store last night. Same description, same method. It was on the morning news. This news should have been immediately vindicating, but Tom knew the system well enough by now to temper his expectations. Have they made the connection? She shook her head. The new lawyer is going to bring it up. He thinks. A guard tapped Tom on the shoulder. "Time's up, Chen." Tom gripped the phone tighter. "Just one more minute. Now," the guard insisted, his hand moving to his baton. Tom couldn't risk another confrontation. Not in his condition. He gave his wife a resigned look. "I love you. Tell the kids I love them too." "We're going to get you out," she promised as he hung up the phone. "Just hold on." Back in his cell, Tom's condition worsened. The brief walk and emotional visit had drained what little energy he had. He collapsed onto his bunk, his breathing coming in short, painful gasps. Rodriguez watched him with growing alarm. "Guard!" he called out. "We need help in here." A guard appeared, looking annoyed at the disturbance. His expression changed when he saw Tom's ashen face and the sweat pouring off him, despite the cell's chill. Within the hour, Tom was finally taken to the jail's medical ward. The doctor there, an actual physician, not just a nurse, took one look at him and ordered x-rays. The results confirmed what Tom had known all along: 3 broken ribs, one of which had caused a small puncture in his lung. He was running a fever of 102 from the developing infection. "This didn't just happen," the doctor said, frowning at the guards. "These injuries are days old. He should have been treated immediately." The guards looked away, suddenly very interested in the floor tiles. Tom was handcuffed to a hospital bed and transferred to the county hospital under guard. The treatment was better, but the indignity remained. Even while hooked up to IVs and oxygen, he was treated like a dangerous criminal. The handcuff around his wrist rattled against the bed rail whenever he moved. In the bed next to him, separated only by a thin curtain, was another prisoner. The man was recovering from surgery for appendicitis and was in a talkative mood. "What are you in for?" he asked Tom during their second day together. "Armed robbery," Tom replied bitterly, "except I didn't do it. I was at work." The man made a sympathetic sound. "Yeah, I hear that a lot, but in your case I believe it." Tom turned his head, surprised. "Why's that?" "Because I know the guy who's been doing those robberies. He's been bragging about it in lockup. Light-skinned dude named Phillips. Wears a fake beard when he does the jobs. He's hit like 5 places in the last month." Tom's heart began to race, setting off one of the monitors. A nurse poked her head in, checked the machine, then left again. "You know him?" Tom asked urgently. "Would you tell that to someone?" "My lawyer?" The man hesitated. "Nobody likes a snitch. Please," Tom said. "I've got 2 kids at home. I could be looking at years for something I didn't do." After a long pause, the man nodded. "Give me your lawyer's info. I'll think about it." It wasn't much, but it was something. Another thread that might help unravel the mistake that had derailed Tom's life. After 4 days in the hospital, Tom was deemed stable enough to return to jail. His ribs were wrapped, his lung reinflated, and the infection brought under control with powerful antibiotics. He wasn't healed, not by a long shot, but he was no longer in immediate danger. The paperwork from his hospital stay created another unexpected ripple. Because his injuries were now officially documented as serious and occurring during his arrest, an automatic internal affairs investigation was triggered. The officers involved would have to explain how a compliant suspect ended up with life-threatening injuries. Back in his cell, Tom found a letter waiting for him. It was from his new lawyer, a man named Douglas Harper. The letter was brief but contained the news Tom had been desperate to hear. "Security footage from your workplace confirms your presence until 8:37 p.m. on the night in question. The robbery occurred at 8:15 p.m., making your involvement physically impossible. I am filing an emergency motion to dismiss all charges, with a hearing scheduled for tomorrow morning. Additionally, a second robbery with an identical MO occurred while you were in custody, further supporting your innocence. Please be ready to appear in court at 9 a.m. Tom read the letter 3 times, hardly daring to believe it. The system that had so quickly assumed his guilt was finally being forced to consider his innocence. But even as hope bloomed, a harder reality set in. The damage was already done. His body was broken. His family was in debt. His reputation was stained. His children were confused and frightened. Even if he walked free tomorrow, nothing would ever be quite the same again. The world he'd trusted had betrayed him, and some injuries don't show up on x-rays. The courthouse was a maze of echoing hallways and unmarked doors. Tom sat on a hard wooden bench outside courtroom C, his new lawyer beside him reviewing documents one last time. The handcuffs dug into Tom's wrists, a constant reminder of his current reality. Despite the evidence proving his innocence, he was still being treated like a criminal. "How are you feeling?" Douglas Harper asked, glancing up from his papers. Unlike the overworked public defender, Harper radiated competence and determination. His suit was crisp, his briefcase expensive, his manner confident. "Nervous," Tom admitted. "What if the judge doesn't believe us?" "The evidence speaks for itself," Harper replied. The timeline makes it physically impossible for you to have committed the robbery. That's not a matter of opinion, it's simple geography and mathematics. Tom nodded but couldn't shake his anxiety. The past 2 weeks had taught him a harsh lesson about justice. It wasn't automatic or guaranteed, even with truth on your side. All rise. The bailiff's voice rang out as a door opened and the judge entered the courtroom. Judge Hernandez was an older woman with silver-streaked hair and reading glasses perched at the end of her nose. She scanned the courtroom with sharp eyes that suggested she missed nothing. Case number 24 CR 7382, State versus Thomas Chen, the clerk announced. Harper stood. Your Honor, I've filed an emergency motion to dismiss all charges against my client based on exculpatory evidence that proves Mr. Chen's innocence beyond any doubt. The prosecutor, a young man named Reynolds who looked barely old enough to have finished law school, shuffled through his papers with a frown. Your Honor, the state has not had sufficient time to review this supposed evidence. We request a continuance. Judge Hernandez peered at him over her glasses. Mr. Reynolds, according to the filing, this evidence was submitted to your office 3 days ago. That seems like adequate time. We've been very busy, Your Honor. I imagine Mr. Chen has been busy too, sitting in jail for a crime he didn't commit, the judge replied dryly. Let's proceed. Harper activated a laptop connected to the courtroom's display system. Your Honor, the robbery at Quick Stop on Oak Street occurred at 8:15 p.m. on April 3rd. The security footage I'm about to show proves that my client was at his workplace, Ray's Auto Shop, until 8:37 p.m. that evening, making it physically impossible for him to have been at the robbery scene. The screen displayed a time-stamped security video showing Tom in his work uniform, clocking out and chatting with co-workers. The time clearly read 8:37 p.m. Additionally, Harper continued, I have Ray Winston, the owner of Ray's Auto Shop, here to testify that Mr. Chen was working until closing time that evening. A middle-aged man with calloused hands and a worried expression stood up from the gallery. He'd known Tom for 9 years and couldn't believe his dedicated employee was being accused of armed robbery. Mr. Chen is one of my best mechanics, Ray testified after being sworn in. He worked a full shift that day from noon until 8:30. I saw him leave myself. There's no way he could have robbed that store. Judge Hernandez nodded, then turned to the prosecutor. Mr. Reynolds, does the state have any evidence that contradicts this timeline? Reynolds looked uncomfortable. The arresting officers identified Mr. Chen as matching the description of the robbery suspect. That's not what I asked, the judge said firmly. Do you have any evidence that places Mr. Chen at the scene of the crime at 8:15 p.m., when your own evidence confirms he was still at work? No, Your Honor, Reynolds admitted reluctantly. Then I'm granting the motion to dismiss all charges against Mr. Chen. She banged her gavel with finality. Mr. Chen, you are free to go. The words seemed to hang in the air. After 2 weeks of hell, it was over just like that. Tom sat stunned as Harper clapped him on the shoulder. We did it, the lawyer said with a smile. The bailiff will process your release paperwork. But Harper wasn't finished. He approached the bench. Your Honor, given the circumstances of my client's arrest and the serious injuries he sustained while in custody, we intend to file a civil rights lawsuit against the police department. Judge Hernandez nodded. That's your right, Counselor. And I'm ordering all evidence in this case preserved for that proceeding. As Tom was led out to process his release, he felt oddly hollow. He should be elated. He was going home to his family. But the injustice of it all still burned. 2 weeks of his life stolen. His body damaged. His family traumatized. And for what? Because he vaguely resembled someone else? While waiting for the final paperwork, Tom heard a commotion in the hallway. A news crew had set up near the courthouse steps and a reporter was interviewing someone. Curious, Tom moved closer, still flanked by a deputy until his release was official. We've obtained exclusive security footage from a business across from the police traffic stop, the reporter was saying. The video appears to contradict the official police report about the arrest of Tom Chen. Tom froze. There was footage of his arrest? He hadn't known that. The reporter continued. Our source, who wishes to remain anonymous, says the video clearly shows Mr. Chen complying with officers before being violently taken to the ground. We'll be airing the full footage on our evening news broadcast. The business owner, a middle-aged woman with determined eyes, stood slightly off camera. She owned the coffee shop on the corner where Tom had been pulled over. Her security cameras aimed at her parking lot had captured the entire incident. After seeing the news about Tom's case, she'd checked her footage and been horrified by what she found. "I couldn't just sit on this," she told Tom later, when he approached her after being officially released. "What they did to you was wrong. When I saw them slam you down like that when you weren't resisting at all, I had to do something." The footage she'd provided to the local news station would prove to be a turning point. Unlike the police body cams that had mysteriously malfunctioned during Tom's arrest, her security video showed the entire incident from start to finish. The calm way Tom had complied, the unnecessary escalation by the officers, the excessive force used on a man who was clearly not resisting. As Tom finally walked out of the courthouse a free man, his wife ran to embrace him, careful of his still healing ribs. His lawyer stood nearby, already on his phone, arranging their next steps. "Channel 4 wants an interview," Harper told him. "Your story is gaining traction. People are outraged." Tom wasn't sure how he felt about becoming the center of a media storm, but he understood the importance of speaking out. If his experience could prevent this from happening to someone else, maybe some good could come from his suffering. That evening, sitting in his own living room surrounded by his family, Tom watched the news broadcast. The footage was even worse than he remembered. From the external perspective, the brutality was clear and undeniable. The officers hadn't just been rough, they'd been aggressive from the start, escalating a routine traffic stop into violence within seconds. His phone rang constantly. Journalists, activists, concerned citizens. Some calls he took. Most he didn't. He was still processing, still healing, still trying to understand how his life had been upended so completely. The police department issued a terse statement. "We are investigating the incident and have placed the officers involved on administrative leave, pending the outcome of that investigation." It was standard damage control, but the public wasn't buying it. The video had gone viral, spreading across social media platforms and generating millions of views within hours. Hashtags demanding justice for Tom trended nationally. Protest groups organized rallies outside police headquarters. And then, 3 days after Tom's release, another bombshell dropped. The actual robber was caught red-handed during another holdup, this time at a gas station on the other side of town. His name was Kevin Phillips, the very man Tom's hospital roommate had mentioned. Phillips was a serial robber who had hit 7 stores in the area over the past month. When arrested, he was wearing a fake beard and carrying a replica gun. He confessed to all the robberies, including the one Tom had been accused of. The news coverage was relentless. Side-by-side photos showed that while both men were of similar height and build, the resemblance ended there. Phillips was 10 years younger than Tom, with distinctive tattoos on his arms that Tom didn't have. The description that had led to Tom's arrest was so vague it could have fit thousands of men in the city. A week after his release, Tom received an unexpected visitor. Karen Wu, a young journalist from the local paper, had been digging into police records and discovered something disturbing. "The officers who arrested you," she said, sitting at Tom's kitchen table with her laptop open, "they have a history, 5 complaints of excessive force in the past 3 years, all filed by people of color, all dismissed after internal investigations." Tom wasn't surprised, but the confirmation still hurt. "So I wasn't the first." "Not even close," Karen replied, sliding a folder toward him. "These are public records I've compiled. Witness statements, medical reports, complaint forms, all showing a pattern of behavior by these same officers." Tom flipped through the documents, a cold feeling settling in his stomach. Each file represented someone like him, a person whose life had been damaged by the very people sworn to protect and serve. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked. Karen's eyes were steady. "Because your case is different. You have video evidence. You have public attention. You have a chance to do what none of these other victims could, hold these officers accountable." Tom closed the folder, his decision made. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about justice for everyone who'd suffered at the hands of these officers. It was about preventing future abuses. It was about changing a system that allowed the powerful to hurt the vulnerable without consequences. "I'll do whatever it takes," he told her. "Where do we start?" The constant pain in Tom's side had become a familiar companion. 6 weeks after his release, his ribs were healing, but the doctor said it might be months before he felt normal again. The physical therapy sessions twice a week were grueling, teaching him how to strengthen his damaged muscles without re-injuring himself. But the physical wounds were only part of the battle. Tom jumped at sudden noises. He broke into a cold sweat whenever he saw a police car in his rearview mirror. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by nightmares of being pinned down, unable to breathe. His doctor had a name for it, post-traumatic stress, and had recommended counseling. "I'm not crazy," Tom had protested when his wife suggested he go. "No one said you were," she'd replied gently. "But you've been through something terrible. Getting help isn't weakness, it's how you get better." Eventually, he'd agreed. The counselor, a kind-eyed woman with a quiet voice, helped him understand that his reactions were normal, that his brain was still processing the trauma. It helped, though he'd never admit how much. The civil lawsuit against the police department was moving forward, slowly grinding through the legal system. Harper had warned him it could take years to resolve, but Tom was committed to seeing it through. This wasn't about money, though the medical bills were crushing. It was about accountability. The officers who had arrested him, Officers Daniels and Reynolds, remained on paid administrative leave while the department conducted its so-called investigation. Tom had little faith in the process. After all, these same officers had been cleared in every previous complaint. "They're stalling," Harper explained during one of their meetings. "They're hoping the public outrage will die down, that people will forget and move on to the next scandal." But people weren't forgetting. Karen Wu's series of articles in the local paper had sparked a firestorm. She'd uncovered 15 similar cases involving Officers Daniels and Reynolds over the past 5 years. Excessive force, false arrests, falsified reports. In each case, the officers had been cleared by internal affairs. The pattern was undeniable, especially when mapped against demographics. The victims were disproportionately people of color or those from poorer neighborhoods. People who traditionally had less power, less voice, less ability to fight back against a system designed to protect its own. "They picked the wrong guy this time," Ray had said when he visited Tom at home, bringing a casserole from his wife and news from the shop. "They didn't count on someone with a rock-solid alibi and video evidence." Tom wasn't sure if he was the wrong guy or exactly the right one, someone who couldn't be easily dismissed or silenced. Either way, he found himself in the uncomfortable position of reluctant spokesman for a cause he'd never asked to join. The community support had been overwhelming. Neighbors brought meals. Former customers from Ray's sent cards and well wishes. A local organization helping victims of police misconduct reached out to offer resources and support. But there was backlash too. Anonymous threats came by email and phone. Blue Lives Matter supporters posted negative comments on news articles about his case. Some people insisted that he must have done something to provoke the officers, that the video wasn't showing the whole story. "You can't win with some people," his wife said after reading particularly nasty comments on an online article. "They've already decided who the good guys and bad guys are, and no evidence will change their minds." 3 months after his release, Tom sat at a long table in a conference room at Harper's law office. Across from him were representatives from the city attorney's office and the police department's legal team. They'd requested a mediation session to discuss a potential settlement. "The city is prepared to offer $175,000, the lead attorney said, sliding a document across the table. "That would cover your medical expenses, lost wages, and provide compensation for pain and suffering. In return, you would drop all claims and sign a non-disclosure agreement." Harper didn't touch the paper. "And the officers?" "They would remain on the force with additional training," the attorney replied smoothly. "The department acknowledges that proper procedures weren't followed in this case." Tom felt his chest tighten with anger. "Proper procedures weren't followed? Is that what you call breaking an innocent man's ribs and puncturing his lung? Is that what you call falsifying a police report?" The city attorney maintained his professional demeanor. "Mr. Chen, we understand your frustration. This offer represents the city's good faith effort to make this right." "No," Tom said firmly. "This isn't about money. It's about making sure those officers never do this to anyone else. It's about changing a system that lets them hurt people without consequences." Harper nodded, backing his client. "My client isn't interested in settling unless the officers are terminated, and the department agrees to substantial reforms in how excessive force complaints are handled. And there will be no non-disclosure agreement. The public deserves to know what happened here." The meeting ended shortly after, with the city representatives promising to take these concerns back to their superiors. Tom knew they were just going through the motions. They had never intended to offer real justice, just enough money to make the problem go away quietly. Outside the law office, a small group of supporters had gathered. They held signs reading, "Justice for Tom and End Police Brutality." Tom stopped to thank them, still uncomfortable with the attention, but grateful for the support. Among them was a thin man with haunted eyes whom Tom didn't recognize. After the crowd dispersed, the man approached him hesitantly. "Mr. Chen, my name is Luis Ortiz. The same officers who hurt you, they did something similar to my brother 2 years ago. Beat him during a traffic stop. He filed a complaint, but nothing came of it. When I saw your story on the news, I knew I had to come forward." Tom listened as Luis explained how his brother had been stopped for a broken taillight, just as Tom had been stopped for supposedly matching a suspect description. The interaction had escalated quickly, resulting in broken bones and trumped-up charges of resisting arrest. "My brother took the plea deal they offered," Luis said, his voice tight with emotion. "He had a record already. Nothing violent, just possession charges from when he was younger. His lawyer said no one would believe him over the police, not with his history. He's still on probation." By the end of the week, Harper had collected statements from 7 more victims of Officers Daniels and Reynolds. Each story followed a similar pattern. Minor stops escalating to violence, followed by charges of resisting arrest or assaulting an officer. Most had taken plea deals, afraid of longer sentences if they fought the charges. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A clerk in the police department's records division, troubled by what she was seeing in Tom's case, anonymously leaked internal emails showing that supervisors had been aware of the pattern of complaints against Daniels and Reynolds for years. Rather than investigating thoroughly, they had deliberately limited the scope of internal reviews and coached the officers on how to write their reports to justify their actions. The leaked emails made national news. Suddenly, what had been a local story became part of a larger national conversation about police accountability and oversight. Civil rights organizations offered support. Legal experts weighed in on news programs. Politicians made statements about the need for reform. The police chief, facing mounting pressure, announced the formation of an independent review panel to investigate all complaints against the department over the past 5 years. It was a start, but Tom knew it wasn't enough. The problem wasn't just a few bad apples, it was a system designed to protect officers at the expense of the truth. Harper called an emergency meeting with Tom and his wife. "The city's changing its tune," he explained. "They're offering a new settlement, $750,000, no non-disclosure agreement, and both officers will be terminated. Additionally, they're agreeing to implement new oversight measures for excessive force complaints." Tom considered the offer carefully. It addressed his main concerns. The officers would be off the streets, and the department would be forced to change how it handled misconduct. The money would secure his family's future and pay for the ongoing medical care he needed. But something still didn't feel right. What about the supervisors who covered for them? What about the other victims who took plea deals based on false charges? Are their convictions going to be reviewed? Harper shook his head. "That's not part of this offer. We could push for more, but it might mean years of litigation with no guarantee of a better outcome." Tom's wife squeezed his hand. "It's your decision. We'll support whatever you choose." He thought of his children who still had nightmares about their dad being taken away. He thought of the strain on his wife, who had been carrying the family's burdens alone. He thought of Luis's brother and the others who had been hurt by the same officers. The system wouldn't change overnight. But maybe, just maybe, this was a step in the right direction. Maybe his suffering could be the catalyst for something better. "I need to talk to the other victims first," Tom said finally. "I need to know if they think this is enough. Because this isn't just my fight anymore. It's theirs too." Harper nodded, respect in his eyes. "I'll arrange it. But remember, Tom, whatever you decide, you've already changed things. People are paying attention now. That matters." Tom looked out the window at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, other officers were making split-second decisions that would change people's lives forever. Some of those decisions would be right, made by good cops trying their best in difficult situations. Others would be wrong, made by those who abused their power because they could. The fight for justice was bigger than his case alone. But every fight had to start somewhere. Maybe this was just the beginning. 1 year after his arrest, Tom stood at the podium in City Hall, adjusting the microphone with hands that still trembled slightly whenever he spoke in public. The room was packed. Community members, reporters, city officials, and police representatives all watching with varying degrees of interest and skepticism. "I never wanted to be standing here," Tom began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I never wanted to be a symbol or a case study or a hashtag. I was just a mechanic trying to get home to my family." The previous 12 months had been a roller coaster of legal battles, public scrutiny, physical recovery, and personal growth. The settlement offer had been the beginning, not the end. After meeting with other victims of Officers Daniels and Reynolds, Tom had made a difficult decision to reject the money and push for more comprehensive reforms. The settlement wasn't enough. Harper had agreed when Tom told him his decision. But this path will be harder, longer, and less certain. Tom had understood the risks. But after hearing the stories of others, like Luis's brother who still had a criminal record based on false charges, or the young college student whose career prospects were damaged by an arrest that never should have happened, he couldn't accept a solution that helped only him. So instead of settling, they'd expanded the lawsuit, bringing in other victims as plaintiffs and targeting not just the officers but the supervisors and policies that had enabled their behavior. The city had fought back hard, challenging evidence, questioning motives, using every legal maneuver to delay and discourage. But public pressure had continued to build. Karen Wu's articles had won a regional journalism award and sparked a state-level investigation. Community organizations had held rallies and petition drives. Social media campaigns had kept the story alive when traditional news outlets moved on to other topics. 6 months into the legal battle, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A fellow officer who had worked with Daniels and Reynolds came forward as a whistleblower, providing internal communication showing that their superiors had not only ignored complaints, but had actively encouraged aggressive tactics in certain neighborhoods to maintain order. The whistleblower, Officer Jung, had risked his career and the hostility of his colleagues to speak out. "I became a cop to protect people," he'd explained in a sworn deposition. "What I was seeing wasn't protection. It was abuse of power. I couldn't stay silent anymore." His testimony had cracked open the blue wall of silence. 2 more officers had come forward with similar accounts. The department's carefully maintained image of a few bad apples had crumbled, revealing a culture that rewarded aggression and punished those who questioned tactics. Now, standing at the podium in City Hall, Tom was witnessing the culmination of their efforts. The mayor, city council, and police chief were about to sign a consent decree, a legally binding agreement to implement sweeping reforms within the department. "What happened to me was wrong," Tom continued, looking out at the crowd. "But it wasn't unique. For years, people have been hurt by the same officers, the same tactics, the same system that values control over justice. Today, we're taking a step toward changing that system." The reforms were significant. Mandatory body cameras that couldn't be turned off during interactions with the public, an independent review board with civilian oversight to investigate complaints, improved training on de-escalation techniques, and a commitment to review past cases involving officers with multiple complaints. Most importantly to Tom, the agreement included a process to expunge the records of those who had taken plea deals in cases involving officers with established patterns of misconduct. People like Luis's brother would have a chance to clear their names. After the ceremony, Tom stood with his family in the hallway outside the council chambers. His children, who had grown noticeably taller during the past year, clung to his sides. They understood more now about what had happened to their father. Not all the details, but enough to know he had been hurt unfairly and had fought to make things right. "Is it over now, Dad?" his son asked, looking up at him with solemn eyes. Tom tousled his hair. "This part is. We've made things better, I hope." His wife squeezed his hand. She had been his rock throughout the ordeal, holding the family together when he couldn't, believing in him when he doubted himself. The past year had strained their marriage at times, but ultimately strengthened it. They had discovered reserves of resilience neither knew they possessed. "Mr. Chen," a hesitant voice interrupted their moment. Tom turned to see a woman he didn't recognize. She was perhaps in her 50s with worry lines etched around her eyes and mouth. "I just wanted to thank you. My grandson was arrested by those officers 2 years ago. He's been in jail for something he didn't do. Now with the case review, he might get out." Tom nodded, understanding the mix of hope and caution in her voice. The reforms wouldn't fix everything immediately. Some wounds couldn't be healed by policy changes, but it was a start. Later that evening, Tom sat on his back porch watching the sunset. His physical therapist had told him he'd reached maximum medical improvement. His ribs had healed as much as they ever would. He would always have a slight hitch in his breathing during exertion, a permanent reminder of that night on the asphalt. Harper joined him, handing him a cold drink before taking the adjacent chair. The lawyer had become a friend over the months of working together. They'd spent countless hours strategizing, preparing depositions, and sometimes just talking about life beyond the case. You know, most clients would have taken the money and moved on, Harper remarked. Not many have the stomach for this kind of fight. Tom shrugged. I couldn't live with myself if I'd done that. Not after meeting the others. Well, you've made a difference. Real change doesn't happen overnight, but this is significant. What about Officers Daniels and Reynolds? Tom asked. The two officers at the center of the storm had remained largely invisible throughout the process, shielded by their union and department protocols. Daniels resigned last week, Harper replied. Reynolds is fighting termination, but it's just a matter of time. Neither will work in law enforcement again, at least not in this state. It wasn't jail time. The district attorney had declined to pursue criminal charges despite the evidence of false reports and excessive force. But it was something. They wouldn't have the power to hurt others the way they had hurt Tom and so many before him. The next morning, Tom returned to Ray's auto shop for his first full day of work since the arrest. His co-workers welcomed him with awkward congratulations and concerned questions about whether he was really ready. They meant well, but they couldn't truly understand what he'd been through. Ray pulled him aside after lunch. You know you're kind of famous now, the older man said. People are coming in asking for you specifically, saying they want the mechanic who stood up to the cops. Tom grimaced. I'm not comfortable with that. I know. But you did something important, Tom. People respect that. Under a car later that afternoon, hands busy with the familiar work of replacing a timing belt, Tom found himself reflecting on the strange path his life had taken. He had never sought the spotlight or wanted to be an activist. He'd just wanted justice. First for himself, then for others who had faced similar wrongs. The changes he'd helped create weren't perfect. Implementation would take time, resistance was inevitable, and true culture change would require sustained effort. But it was progress. People who had previously suffered in silence now had their stories